Hello, hello. Welcome to the Black Sheep live stream. I am Salome Siboney, co-founder of the publication called The Black Sheep, and a writer and an artist. And I am bringing you what I'm calling the Weekly Whitepill. Every week, I round up the good news that I come across and we discuss it here. Because we don't spend very much time talking about the things that are going well. And it's not just because things are so bad, it's because we have an innate bias towards the negative. It's called the negativity bias. And it can make us cynical and it can give us a warped perspective on the world. But it's especially dangerous today when we have the capacity to consume so much bad news that it really can affect how we see the world. And I don't think it's an accident that there are higher rates of depression, anxiety, particularly among the younger generations that spend more time connected to the kinds of technology that provides you a constant stream of bad news. So in this weekly series, the Weekly Whitepill, I'm going to cover good news. We're going to take the time to look at and discuss what's going well in the world. And the point isn't just to have some kumbaya, happy, optimistic moment. It's to be aware of reality. And good news is part of reality. I think there's a misconception that cynicism and being constantly aware of everything that's going wrong somehow makes you more worldly, more informed. But the reality is that people who think that we've never lived in a worse time are not more informed. They're not having a more accurate picture of the world because they have a skewed understanding of the world. And it's not just that this is depressing for you and unhelpful, it's actually dangerous for a culture. Because if you have a large portion of people in your society who think that your society is bad, that everything's going wrong, those people are going to take actions in line with that flawed perspective. And the actions are going to be out of sync with reality. So if you think things are really bad, you're unlikely to continue and to support the processes that are working because you don't realize they're working. And so what I'm trying to do with this weekly good news roundup is not just have a happy-go-lucky party time, but to craft an opportunity for people to have a more accurate view of the world, which includes the good news. So we've got several different good news stories for you today, and they're all great. They're all actually really cool things that I'm excited to share. And I've found that this weekly white pill is good for me. And so that's how I know it's going to be good for other people too, because it is so easy to spend time thinking about and commenting on and worrying about all the things that are going wrong in the world. And it's not even just the things that are going wrong in the sense of there's a war here, there's starvation there, there's crime here, there's violence there. It's also just the fact that it's really easy for your social media feed to become replete with people complaining, with negative people who are constantly criticizing and tearing down others. I mean, I know that my Twitter feed for just a minute the other day was full of people criticizing a goddamn dress. It was like a whole big deal because the publication Evie, which is wonderful, released a product, a dress. And ooh boy, you would have thought that this was an act of war because some people thought that this was just the worst dress ever and it is so slutty, and I thought Evie was conservative. And I thought, not only are these people wrong, and it's just like, move on. Maybe the dress isn't for you. Maybe it's for other people, and that's fine. It struck me that this is exactly the kind of negativity bias by which we choose to focus on and engage with the bad that we see that creates this cultural malaise where you log into your social media and it's not that you're seeing these bad news stories across the world where it's genuinely bad news. It's just people who are in a bad mood, who have a bad outlook on the world. And so they're constantly criticizing things and finding reasons to tell you why things are bad. And so I believe that we need more than ever to consciously counterbalance all of that, the genuine bad news and just the bad perspectives that people share, with good news, with an effort to look at what's working and to appreciate it and to consciously make that part of our worldview. This is the other thing that is a subtle mechanism by which social media can warp our perspective and ultimately warp your personality, is that the things that you engage with don't just take up your attention, they impact how you think about the world. So it's not just the time that you spent reading about some bad news in the world that is going to make you perhaps more negative or cynical. No, what actually happens is that you're practicing the act of looking at and analyzing negative things. And so I really believe that in a way, we can lose the skill of looking for the silver lining, of looking for what works and genuinely accepting and incorporating that into our worldview. In the previous and debut episode of this Weekly Whitepill series, I covered a bunch of other good news stories, and I explained a lot more about how the negativity bias works, how we are biased to focus on and overweigh the negative and just kind of gloss over the positive, no matter how positive it may be, because it just doesn't grip us the same way that negative things do. And what I wanted to emphasize with explaining that concept was that it's not enough to just read a good news story and go about your day. That's still not going to create that kind of balance between the bad and the good in the information and the things that we consume. You have to do what your mind does naturally with negative news, which is incorporate it into your worldview. I swear, I think that there are a lot of people who have forgotten how to accept good news. I don't think that it is something we naturally know how to do now, where we just update our worldview and think, oh, okay, here's some good news on the environment, which I have built an entire narrative about, telling me that the world is going to be unlivable in 20 years because of climate change and everything is getting worse and all the animals are going extinct and humans are to blame and humans are terrible because of that. That is not an easy worldview to update with one good news story about the environment. You really have to consciously be aware of the process by which you craft your perspective. And that's something that I've been increasingly interested in as I see how malleable our perspective is and how much it is impacted by the media that we consume. It's really, in some ways, far more scary than all the misinformation, fear-mongering that we saw. I'm not even so worried about people adopting incorrect facts or information. I'm more worried about the full narrative that people create, even out of true information, because that's the thing that really shapes how you act in the world, how you view other people, and whether you believe that there's a good future for you, which also very much impacts how you act in the world. And so we are going to go over some good news, and I'm going to talk about how this good news can factor into our current, more negative views on these different subjects, like the environment, like healthcare, and like humanity. And what's interesting about the humanity section that I include in this good news series is that it's part of the light triad, which is this psychological concept that there's about 3 major kind of personality traits that comprise the light triad. And one of those is faith in humanity and humanism. So do you genuinely kind of admire people and see the good in people? And do you appreciate humanity? Do you think humanity is going in the right direction? These things comprise the light triad, which has been shown to correlate with a lot of good outcomes, including good mental health and also pro-social behavior, like literally being a good person. So why I include this section along with the good news is because we need this. We need to cultivate this attitude of liking human beings. And when you spend a lot of your time consuming bad news and seeing how people act a fool on social media, it's hard to do that. And more, the time we spend with media is crowding out the real world experiences we have. And the time that we spend consuming media is often so impactful on our worldview that even though we can go about life and have a totally nice time and engage with other people and enjoy it, we have that like one bad interaction on social media. And because of the negativity bias and because of how outlandish some of the things that we see on social media are, it impacts our way of viewing humankind and humanity so much more heavily than all the good interactions that we have every day in our normal offline life. So that is why I've included this section. So the Weekly White Pill is very much what it sounds like. It is meant to help you have a more balanced perspective and to not fall to the cynicism that I see as such an easy trap for us to fall into today, which is bad for you in so many ways, but it's also bad for the people around you. So let's take a breath and get ready to dive into the good news. And so I invite you to consciously accept that things can be good. Things can be bad, and things can also be good. And I think that's where we get into so much trouble with our perspective on the world now, is thinking that bad news has to be the defining element for life. If there's bad things, that means that's the primary way that things are. That's not the case. Of course not. And we have like ancient Eastern philosophy to confirm that. The idea of yin and yang, these things, these opposites can coexist. And in fact, they have a meaningful relationship through coexistence. Rather than just accept the bad news and kind of diminish the good news because we've adopted this narrative that life is bad, things are bad, we can take both of these things. Be aware of the bad news, respond to it, care about it, but don't diminish the good news. Take the good news as well. Incorporate it into your worldview. It's real. It's kind of crazy to me that we just like don't engage with it that much. Like you'll see these publications like Good News Publication. And sure, they'll tell you like, here's good news. This is what happened. But is there a bunch of discourse around the good news? Do live streamers do videos talking about all the good news? Do you see a lot of like reaction videos to good news? No, I don't see that. And I know there's a few people that do it and God bless them. But the reality is the negativity bias shows up in our online discourse as well, in what people choose to react to, in what drives the discourse, what becomes trending online. And so I want this to also be part of the discourse. We don't only have to talk about and analyze what's going wrong. So we're going to actually get in deep with the good news, not just talk about, here's the headline, very nice, moving on. We're going to talk about what it means. We're going to have discourse that is around good news. All right. And I'm going to be trying out a new live streaming approach. We're going to try to throw up the articles on screen. So give me notes if something's going wrong with it. Let me know. And let me know what you think about the discourse and whether it is way too inundated with negativity and whether you see what I'm seeing, which is the negativity bias we have running rampant because we are constantly connected to media. And so we, of course, gravitate towards what is negative, and it just becomes this compounding effect where it's a feedback loop of negativity, responding to negativity, responding to negativity. And I think it's making people crazy. So let me know if you see that as well. Okay, let's get going here. Screen sharing. We're going to start with the environment. So skip that. I thought this story was really cool. which is scientists discover plastic-eating insect with potential to combat pollution. I know it's kind of a nasty story. Nobody likes insects and the things that they eat, kind of gross. But this is actually one of the better examples of insects doing things that we want. And it is eating plastic. So if you are like me, you have heard about microplastics in every part of our body, the giant plastic garbage pollution island in the ocean, and how it seems that plastics have all of a sudden become from a common household product to a poison. And so there's so much concern about this, and there's a lot of doom and gloom around it, because when you tell people, hey, actually this ingredient, this item that we use in almost everything that is around you all the time, that is still very much used in your food and all these things, and is constantly littered on the side of the road and is a giant island of garbage in the ocean, choking all the little sea turtles, choking all the little animals. It's depressing. It's very depressing. I think plastic pollution is one of the things that really gets my environmentalist heart going, where it just feels like, oh my gosh, we've got to figure this out. And until this article, I was kind of bleak on that because I didn't know what we could possibly do about it. But this is why good news is important, because it reminds us that we can solve things. But it's also why I've developed a perspective that thinks about the potential solutions when I am faced with problems. Because so often you hear there's climate change, there's this environmental problem, there's these health problems, there's these issues in government, and it's presented as, and there's no solution. But the reality is that we have almost always found a solution for something along the line in some way. That's why we're still alive, because we adapt. That is one of the most beautiful and powerful elements of being a human. It's adaptability and problem solving. And so look at this. Scientists discover plastic-eating insect with potential to combat pollution. So it says, researchers in Kenya have identified a species of insect that could play a role in reducing global plastic pollution. The Kenyan lesser mealworm, the larval stage of a such and such beetle, has demonstrated the ability to consume and break down polystyrene, which is commonly known as styrofoam. So polystyrene is notoriously difficult to recycle due to its durability and the high costs associated with processing it. And it makes up an estimated 35% of landfill waste, where it can take 500 years to decompose and still continue to persist in the environment over 1 million years. So this is where you get that doom and gloom stuff. I know that a lot of us have heard this kind of statistic about how long it takes plastic to degrade. And it's just the most depressing thing ever, because it's like, that's not even in my lifetime. So very understandably depressing information. But then you have this, where you find out, okay, maybe there's actually something we can do about this. So it says, in a month-long experiment, scientists discovered that the Kenyan lesser mealworm could survive on a diet of polystyrene and consumed over 11% of the material when fed alongside other foods. The larva's ability to consume polystyrene is believed to stem from gut bacteria within the insects, which is capable of producing enzymes that degrade the synthetic plastics. Isn't that so crazy? So basically, the idea is that if these bugs can eat styrofoam and process it, like get rid of it, then we have just found something that can really potentially help us cut down on the amount of plastic pollution. And one of the worst ones, one of the ones that lasts for the longest amount of time. And so it says future studies aim to isolate and scale up these internal mechanisms and explore whether the insects can break down other types of plastic. This is so exciting. I don't think I've ever been this excited about like finding out something that has to do with an insect, but we are in this moment where plastics are a big problem. They're a huge source of pollution and they're poisoning us. We're consuming microplastics that have come from the plastics that we use. And looks like the bugs might save us. Isn't that crazy that bugs are going to be the heroes? But I love that for them and I love that for us. And so here's the thing. What do we do now, right? You've heard all the bad news about the microplastics. You've seen the discourse around the microplastics and the plastic pollution and how sad it is and it's everywhere and it's never going away. And now we have this. And so what do? Do you have a little more hope? Or do you just kind of think, I don't think that's ever going to pan out and stick with the doom and gloom? Because I genuinely think that there are a lot of people that will see this story and just kind of not update their worldview on the plastic pollution situation. Because in some ways, we prefer the lack of suspense that is hopelessness. There is a sense in which just accepting, no, we're just all going to be poisoned by plastics, I'm not going to even have hope on this, feels like relief. But I don't think that's healthy, because the reality is hope is healthy. That is what helps us to do things that can further our lives and the lives of others if we have hope that we can do things better. So believe in the bugs, have hope. There is some good news for the plastic pollution situation. So let's move on to another environmental win. I thought this was very cute. Look at this cute little animal. Bedfordshire Safari Park welcomes one of Earth's most endangered animals in major conservation success. All right. Male eastern mountain bongo calf. I don't even know what a bongo calf is. That's how endangered this little animal is. It's called a bongo. I've never heard of that. Was born on October 16th in Woburn Safari Park, the first birth of the species in more than 10 years. Oh, that's so cute. There's just like something very uplifting also about the birth of a little animal, because that's just always like, oh, how nice, happy birthday. But it's also a super endangered animal, and it just had a birthday. So this is already good news, but let's find out more about this. Look at how cute that is. This is great news. I love for there to be more cute animals roaming around the earth. So very good news. A safari park in Bedfordshire has welcomed a bongo calf, one of the most critically endangered animals on the planet, in what it says is a quote-unquote major success for global conservation efforts. First-time mom Othaya gave birth to the male eastern mountain bongo calf, and the first calf born of the species in more than 10 years. The eastern mountain bongo has been hunted almost to extinction in the wild, with less than 100 remaining. Head of the reserves, Tom Robson, said, after a long labor, the large, healthy male calf was born and was soon standing on wobbly legs in the deep bed of straw prepared for his arrival. Both mom and calf are doing really well. Oh, it's so nice. Look at him. He's so cute. Oh, happy birthday. That's so nice. Oh. The bongo are part of a crucial breeding program, and we are hoping in the future our new calf will travel to another wildlife collection and start a breeding program of his own. Oh, that's so sweet. The safari park said the mother and the calf are currently being kept inside to give them time to bond and grow stronger. Okay, so everybody loves the bongo calf, very happy. The eastern mountain bongo is classified as critically endangered, with populations drastically impacted by poaching and habitat loss. So this is what I think is so great about a story like this, is that we have all heard about poaching, habitat loss, endangered species, species going extinct. And every time you hear about that, it's such a bummer. And it's just very much this, why are humans that way? Why are we destroying the earth that we're on? Why are we killing these precious animals to the point that there are none of them left even? And it's a real black pill moment. But the white pill moment is when you realize, okay, that exists. It's not that that doesn't exist. It's not that that isn't a problem. But there are also people who are working to solve the problem, and they're making progress. And so in some ways, this is more meaningful, more impactful than the bad acts that have led to the endangerment of the species. The fact that we actually can help to bring a species back from endangerment, that takes so much more mastery and care and effort than it does to do destruction. And so the fact that we're capable of that is such a white pill moment. But I mean, did you even hear about this? I didn't even hear about it until I went looking for good news. And again, I think it speaks to that negativity bias, because it would be a major headline if somebody found out, oh, some new animal is critically endangered now. That does make the major headlines. But when there's a birth of a critically endangered animal, it doesn't really make as much of a major headline. And that is the negativity bias in a nutshell. So we are very happy for the mountain bongo calf. Very cute. And look at how cute. Oh, that's adorable. So very good news. And it's just like, I'm very much on this tip lately where I'm like, we should be stewards of the earth. We should be, as humans, with the capacity to create such advanced technology and to do such powerful healthcare for both ourselves and for other living things, we should be doing stuff like that. And so it's so great to see that we actually are capable of bringing back species from near extinction. It's such a white pill moment. All right, next, we're going to go to healthcare. So this is one of these areas where I think that we are very black-pilled because there's the problems with the healthcare industry. And I think there's an effect that this has, that it makes us just black-pilled entirely about healthcare as a concept. And we don't have, again, this ability to have a complex, nuanced, duality of healthcare perspective where we think, okay, yes, there are problems with the healthcare industry, with the health insurance systems, with practicing medicine and all the different things. Like, there is problems. And yet there are major advancements as well. And so can we hold both of these things as true at the same time? That would lead you to have a more accurate and balanced outlook on the world. And this is really what I have seen about any good expert in a field. It's very rare to me that I encounter someone who I think is incredibly smart and well-informed and an expert on a subject, and they're like, no, it's just all bad. Like, there's no good, it's just all bad. And equally, you very often don't find that. It's just like, no, this is all great, there's nothing wrong with it. Perfect, we have no problems. This industry, this subject, this idea, all good, nothing bad, no worries. You don't find that kind of simplistic, all or nothing, black and white perspective from people that are really informed and are experts in a subject. And so why are we doing that ourselves? We should be pursuing the same kind of nuanced, varied perspective on things that people who actually know what they're talking about and are experts in things so often have. And that's become to me like one of those red flags where if someone talks about something and it is in that very simplistic, like all good, all bad framework, it triggers the alarm bells for me, which is, I don't think you're really well informed on this topic, because there are very few topics where it's all good, it's all bad. There is usually nuance, there is usually shades of gray. And if you don't see that, it's probably because you are not looking. And rather, you are looking for the things that solely fit your narrative, which is it's all good or it's all bad. And so that is a big red flag for me in terms of an accurate perspective. And so healthcare is one of those things. It is not all good and all bad. And I think in some ways it's crazy how numb we've gotten to the absolute miraculous wonders that our healthcare systems are now able to perform for people. I had so many different stories of firsts and just wonderful advances in technology that I had to sort through to limit down the number of good news in the healthcare sphere to cover, because there's a lot. And so I'm going to cover, I believe, 2 really great stories here. So let's get to it. All right, I love this one. New cancer treatment trial shrinks Luton man's brain tumor by half after just weeks of radioactive injections. So that is a headline for the books, for sure. That is already incredibly good news. So it says, a new radioactive therapy has shrunk a man's deadly brain tumor by half in what experts hope could be a breakthrough cancer treatment. Paul Reed, a 62-year-old engineer from Luton, noticed he had a severe headache last December. 2 weeks later, his wife Pauline was concerned he had a stroke as his face appeared to have dropped on one side. He was diagnosed with recurrent glioblastoma, a type of brain cancer which kills most patients within 18 months, after doctors found a large mass on his brain. Despite undergoing an operation on the 27th of December, followed by courses of radiotherapy and chemotherapy, Mr. Reed was told in July his tumor was growing again. I was fully expecting the tumor to return due to its aggressive nature, he said. I know the outcome isn't great, and I was happy to explore anything else. So he was then offered the chance to become the first patient in a clinical trial aiming to cure the disease, run by the University College London Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. In the Citadel 123 trial, surgeons remove as much tumor as possible before implanting a small medical device called an Ommaya reservoir under the scalp, which connects to the tumor via a small tube. The nuclear medicine team at UCLH then inject a drug which helps repair DNA damage in cells directly into the tumor to deliver small amounts of radioactivity. The drug, given weekly for 4 to 6 weeks, causes lethal damage to tumor cells, but leaves healthy tissue unaffected. Since starting the experimental treatment, Mr. Reed has seen his tumor shrink by half in just a matter of weeks. That's crazy. Can you imagine being that person with a ginormous brain tumor and you're like, yeah, this is a death sentence, effectively. And then you get into this trial and it shrinks your tumor by half. That is good news. That is some serious good news. So he says the trial was a lifeline, as the likelihood of survival according to the data was a year or less for me. I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to be part of this trial and have not experienced any side effects from the injections. That's so crazy. Okay, so he's just a very happy person. He's like, I'm gonna, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but I'm happy. That was very nice. That's not how I would be. I would be like, oh Lord, save me. I'd be so scared. So one of his oncologists said, Mr. Reed's tumor is really quite remarkable for somebody whose tumor is so aggressive. So the reduction in the tumor is remarkable because the tumor was so aggressive. We have to aim to cure this disease, he said. Primary brain tumors do not metastasize around the body and generally stay in the same location in the brain. It doesn't spread to the rest of the body, so using a targeted directly into the tumor approach makes sense. It says a second patient is currently undergoing the same procedure, with one being treated a month by the team. With one being treated a month. Okay, they're doing one patient a month. Said the trial aims to have up to 40 patients treated. The dose of radiation will be increased throughout the trial, and researchers plan to combine this medicine with immunotherapy, which trains the body's immune system to kill cancerous cells. That is so crazy. So this is just excellent good news once again, in terms of medical advancement. And I just think that's like, you have to think about what it was like to be a human being before we had advanced medicine. And I think it's so easy for people to get like really entitled. Honestly, like I think it's a sense of entitlement that like healthcare should be a human right. No one should ever get sick or die from anything because we have some of the technology and so everybody should have access to it immediately all the time. And it's like, that's just not reality. What is reality is what happens to most people, which is you get sick and die. And that is what happened to most people throughout history. So the idea that like we could say these magic words, well, healthcare should be a human right. And then like anybody that doesn't get wonderful healthcare immediately for free is a tragic victim, when that was the norm for most of human history, just sets you up to be a entitled, cynical person. Instead of recognizing like, we're working on it. We're working on it and we can work on it. This is my criticism of people that are so black-pilled about like everything, including the healthcare industry. I think the healthcare industry in the United States and other places as well is a disaster. Like it's so obvious. No one's going to contest that. But does it make it better to be an extreme black-pilled cynic about it and to not recognize the good in our healthcare industry, the good that it is that we are able to create such advanced treatments and that we are constantly moving that forward in a way that makes it more available to other people. These are things that people would have absolutely died from for almost all of human history. And not only died from, but died miserably from. That's kind of like what really brings me back to earth when I am like, oh, this sucks. Like this, the way that the healthcare industry, how expensive things are, like how weird and annoying the healthcare coverage is, how like much worse Obamacare made things, like all these things that it's like, oh, it's going to be a solution. It's like, this still sucks. It is very easy to be black-pilled about all of that. But then you have to take the time to recognize you can still get incredible healthcare that was not available to most of humans throughout most of our history. That is good. And so it's like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, which is the kind of perspective I so often see when we discuss these things. And I just think that's kind of like, I don't know, not only is it not accurate to not recognize how good this is, it's also kind of like entitled. It's really this sense of like not being grateful for how far we've come. Gosh, I just think of how badly people suffered throughout most history because we didn't have the kind of advanced medicine that we have now, let alone the fact that it is more available to people than it ever would have been and ever has been. And we don't spend time recognizing that. And so I just think this, like, can you imagine being a person, having your brain tumor shrunk in half when you were like, yeah, I'm probably gonna die, and you don't? That is some great news. That is some seriously great news. All right, let's move on to our next healthcare good news, which this is a really interesting one. Boom. Americans are now 1/3 less likely to die from cancer at the same age as Americans in 1990. So this is a really interesting graph, and this comes from humanprogress.org and ourworldindata.org is like crunching the numbers, which are great organizations to follow for being aware of what's going right, because so often we have these negative narratives about things, largely because we are consuming bad news and that it just crowds everything out and shapes our worldview. But very often when you look at the numbers, the actual data over time, things are getting better. And that disparity between how we feel about the world and what the data shows about the world is just a fascinating kind of evidence for how rampant the negativity bias is today. So let's look at this. Here is the graph. And what they found is that if you adjust for the population aging, people are getting cancer far less than they would have if they were the same age in 1990. So it says here, after accounting for the population aging, you can see that cancer death rates have fallen by 1/3 since their peak in 1990. And so here's some of what they did with this information. The gray line shows the crude data, which is the rate of deaths from cancer per 100,000 people. It has risen between 1950 and 1990 and has fallen slightly since then. However, cancer death rates rise sharply with age, and the age of the US population has increased since 1950. So we would expect cancer death rates to rise for that reason alone. But what if we adjusted for the increased age of the US population? The red line, the age standardized rate, shows this. It shows that cancer death rates, if the age structure of the US population was held constant throughout. This shows a slight rise until 1990 and then a significant decline. Rates have fallen by 1/3. So this means Americans are now 1/3 less likely to die from cancer at the same age as Americans in 1990. So that's actually a lot of progress in a little amount of time. And this concludes that it comes from several factors: better screening, earlier diagnosis, medical advances in cancer treatment, like potentially the one we just read about, and public health efforts to reduce risk factors like smoking and exposure to carcinogens. So what I think is so interesting about this is, like, I had the narrative that we're all getting cancer more. That's what I thought. I felt like this was true because likely of what I have read and the media coverage around cancer, which just seems bad. And as we've found out that there's so many things in our environment that seem to be linked to the causing of cancer, all these carcinogens. And so it's not surprising that I would adopt this kind of worldview where it's like, we are constantly surrounded by things that are causing cancer. We are getting cancer at younger ages. I know people that have gotten cancer at young ages, and that kind of like anecdotal evidence coinciding with the grander narrative about like people seem to be getting cancer more, and then there's carcinogens everywhere, creates what feels like an accurate worldview, which is, I think we're all getting cancer more than we used to, and this is bad, and it's probably because of the things in our environment, and we have to be super extra careful because we're all getting cancer now. And then you see the numbers. And so this graph really cuts against that narrative that we are getting cancer at higher rates. And even if that is the case, right, I'm not saying that maybe we're not getting diagnosed with cancer, because this says it's deaths from cancer that are dropping. But that's still really good. That's actually really good news. Even if there's like more cancer diagnoses, there's less deaths from cancer than there was in 1990. And so that is absolutely good news. And it's just another example of how we can so easily create this narrative where we cobble together some information, some anecdotes, and boom, you feel like you live in this more dark, negative, dystopian world. And if you don't take the time to engage with the positive news around that same subject, you stay with that kind of like negative view on things. And I really wonder, like, the more and more that I've thought about, like, okay, I need to intentionally seek out good news because it is not finding its way to me naturally. So I have to look for it, because if not, I am not going to know about what's going right in the world. The more I have thought about that, the more I've realized, like, it is your job to craft your perspective accurately. We cannot take for granted that if it's important, it'll just find its way to me. It doesn't work like that. And I mean, just open your social media. That's the obvious evidence that the shit that is not important is so often what gets debated to death. I mean, like I said, I had people arguing over a dress for like 2 days on Twitter on my feed. What is that? That's not, I didn't even choose that, but somehow that's just what happened on my feed. And so we really have to be conscious about the information that we consume and the outcomes that we want of it. You want to have a cynical worldview? Don't do anything. That's going to happen to you anyway. You don't want that? You want to be informed of what's actually working in the world? Seek it out, because it's not going to find you on its own. Okay, so we have one other section that I'm going to cover in our good news roundup, and that is, like I described earlier, good people having good things happen to them, doing good things in the world. The faith in humanity section, the section of this live stream that is going to give you a chance to believe that humans are good or can do good things, which is such an integral part of a healthy perspective. Can you really have a healthy perspective if you are misanthropic? I really don't think so. And I can attest to that personally, because when I was at my most misanthropic, I had really bad ideas, and I was much more vulnerable to destructive, resentful, inaccurate ideologies like radical leftism, because it was feeding off of that misanthropic worldview. It was like, yeah, humans are bad. That's why we should control everything, because humans can't be free to do things on their own. We have to be in charge of things, or else people left to their own devices will do bad. And it's just like, oh my gosh, what a terrible way to think. Like, that's just not healthy. And even if there is a grain of truth in that, which I'm sure there is to some degree, that's for a different discussion. If that is your primary worldview, is that humans are bad, and that's kind of like one of these defining elements of how you analyze things in the world, that is not healthy. And it's just such a basic thing, it seems like. But again, there's this mistaken conflation that being a cynic, being negative, means that you just are worldly. You just know more. You're informed. You're so wise because you know how bad humans are. It's actually the opposite. If you are a truly wise person, you don't waste your time and waste your mental capacities thinking about how bad people are. You have one life to live and it could end tomorrow, and you're wasting it thinking about how bad people are when you could choose to think about the good that people do, the good people that you know, the good people around you. That would be wise. All right, so let's jump on over to the last section of our good news roundup. This is a hell of a story. 924 children reunited with families in 4 months. Okay, so in Lahore, Mera Pyara Center of Punjab Safe City Authority handled 21,723 cases involving children in the last 4 months. Among these, 4,277 were lodged, and 4,290, I keep messing this number up, 4,924 children were safely reunited with their families due to the efforts of the Virtual Center for Child Safety. The spokesperson reported that the Virtual Center for Child Safety resolved 18,908 cases in 4 months, with 167 cases under investigation. I know it's time to wrap up the live stream when I just keep like eating all the words and whatever. All right, so stick with me because this is one of those stories that is just like so uplifting. So here you have all these cases of like abduction. So 214 cases of abduction. In cases of child abuse, 2,592 cases were reported. 623 suspects arrested. And at the end of the day, this is part of a stern crackdown, it says, on proclaimed offenders. The Lahore police Wednesday claimed to have arrested more than 24,000 proclaimed offenders in 11 months. According to a statement of the Lahore police spokesman, the police arrested 5,131 proclaimed offenders. And then just like a bunch of other in place. They just rounding everybody up and arresting them who are harming kids. And we love to see that, right? Because you hear so much about child brides, child trafficking, and our own problems in the United States with like these weird cases of people transing their kids that are too young to even know if they're going to grow up to be a horse or an astronaut. And yet they're like, you should be on puberty blockers, little Johnny, at 2 years old. You clearly know what your life should look like in 50 years. And so I think there's this ethos lately that we are not doing good as a society of adults. You know, like adults are failing to protect and help children. And I've really seen like that concern rise up in recent years. And I think part of that is just like there's so many things where it feels like our society has been more geared towards adults and that like children have become this afterthought. And so it's just nice to see this kind of story where a police department, and no, this is like in Pakistan, are doing so many good things for children. You've got like 4,924 children reunited with their family in 4 months. So that is the kind of thing that it's like you can choose what to focus on, right? Which is, well, those children should have never not been with their family, and it's terrible that they were either ever abducted or abused or anything like this happened. But at the same time is like it's not realistic to want a world where bad things don't happen. Unfortunately, that is what life is. Things degrade, bad things happen. That is the nature of being a living being. And so what is more rational to focus on is, but are we solving the problems? Are we, for the most part, trying to right those inevitable wrongs? And a story like this, where you have such a massive success of reunification of children with their families, this is amazing. Like, it's a great news story. And you can just think about how wonderful that is for those kids and those families and feel like, okay, there is good in the world. Like, it's happening. And I mean, look, I've never been to Pakistan, but I don't always think about it as like the most progressive utopianistic place. And so it's nice to hear that even in countries that are not our own, that don't generally, maybe we think of as our own countries as like, oh, much more protective of children and safer and all these things, like people in other places still care about their children and are still trying to do good. And I think that's like the foundational view of that kind of like humanistic faith in humanity, light triad tenet, is the belief that overall people are trying to do good. They often fail, but we are not all walking around as like psychopaths and sociopaths and abusers. That is not real. And if you think that, you really should just look around, because I believe the world would be a lot worse if there were a lot of people who were a lot worse. And so you look at a story like this and it's like, people are trying to do good. That's what it is. And I think it's like, it seems so simple and so fundamental, but we're bombarded with so much evidence to the contrary often that it can be really necessary to just take that time to be like, that's right, people all over the world try to do good things. And it's real. Okay, so we're going to stop on our last story here. And I think it's one of those like really uplifting stories that we have been propagandized into diminishing. And you're going to see why. Twice homeless millionaire tops UK Black Power list. A man who was twice homeless as a teenager before becoming a multi-millionaire entrepreneur has topped a list celebrating influential Black Britons. Dean Forbes, who, after failing to make it as a professional footballer, began his career in a call center, is now the boss of a software company. He worked his way up from quote-unquote abject poverty on an estate in southeast London to become chief executive of Fortero, a Swedish software firm. Forbes said topping the Power List 2025 was a, quote, professional and career high. He told the BBC that although he grew up in single-parent family on a housing estate in Lewisham, his disabled mom always encouraged her children to be positive and gave them hope. He said he had a quote-unquote whale of a time, a very British thing to say, growing up despite having little money, living in a local community which looked after each other. His said mom taught him and his two brothers to, quote unquote, raise our expectations, never to be victims, and not dwell on misfortunes. All right, can I just pause it there? Never to be victims, raise our expectations, and not dwell on misfortunes. Who tells you exactly the opposite nowadays? How often do we hear that the real radical perspective is to dwell on your misfortunes, not raise your expectations, but think that everything is bad because it is bad, and to absolutely victimize yourself? I just think it's so fascinating how we have lost as a culture, as a people, connection with these fundamental, in some ways obvious truths. And the reason I picked this story, right, where it's like, guy who was homeless twice, becomes a millionaire, and is now on this like top power, Black Power list, is because this is exactly the kind of story that I was told when I was a burgeoning leftist on Tumblr, that was just propaganda to distract us from the true evils of the capitalist system and to get the oppressed to accept their oppression because, ooh, maybe you'll win the lottery one day. And so that is the kind of cynical view that has been filtered through our culture and makes it so unhealthy because, one, we're literally told, like, don't celebrate people's successes. That's just an aberration. And which is so invalidating to someone like this who was homeless twice, became a millionaire, and is now on like this big like accolade list. And it's like, oh no, that's just an aberration. And not only is it an aberration, it is propaganda meant to get you to not take down the system that person used for their success, because, you know, their success is an aberration. So you should still take down the system that they used for their success. I can tell you this mentality perfectly because I used to have it. Ooh, I should pull up this old tweet that I did. Oh man, I forgot to do this. So I have an old tweet that went viral from when I was a leftist, and it was exactly the rhetoric that I'm telling you. I low-key was gonna pull it up and have it ready, but I'm not gonna dig through all my tweets. I don't know how to do it. But it was this news story about how a guy would walk 3 miles to work every day because he didn't have a car, and he was working at this whatever fairly low income job, saving up money so that he could have a car then. And it was the story of, wow, this person's incredible dedication to bettering their lives, the endurance of the human spirit in the face of hardship, the incredible quality of character that it takes to endure that hardship and still persevere for the better. And what did I do as a leftist? I said, these are the kind of stories that the media promotes as positive instead of focusing on the fact that no one should have to be in a situation where they have to walk 3 miles to work because they don't have a car. Mad at myself, mad at my younger foolish self for having that kind of perspective. But that's what qualifies me now to tell you why it is so important to take stories like this and understand what makes them good and why they are not just propaganda so that you can be accepting of your oppressors, but rather they are what give us faith in humanity, okay? They are what help us to move forward, because the reality is, whether or not you gave that man a car and you gave him everything he needed to have a life, first of all, that would have plenty of problems, because we know how many times people come into money, whether it's through the lottery or through an inheritance, and they destroy their lives, okay? Because we are a species that is evolved for hardship. That is what most humans throughout most of our entire history have endured, and that is what we are designed to endure, hardship. So the idea that hardship is some kind of cruel injustice rather than a fact of living, a fact of nature, that life is hard and requires endurance, is willingly subjecting yourself to mental illness. It is I reject the fundamental principles of reality. That is what it is to think that humans should not have to deal with any hardship. And so you could give that guy that I was saying, he shouldn't have to walk to work. Or this man that was homeless and became a millionaire. You could make sure, give him everything from the beginning. I bet a lot of those people would not have as good of a life if you did that. Because there is so often a situation that, and there's research behind it, it's called post-traumatic growth, where hardship provides us with the opportunity to improve ourselves and to then help others. And it is so much more meaningful and satisfying when we achieve things through our hard work of overcoming than to just be born into those things, to just be given those things through no effort of our own. And I mean, it's so crazy because I say this and, I can hear my younger leftist self being oh yeah, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That's just something so that people will stay in their hard situations and we won't look at the fact that there's wealth inequality, blah, blah, blah. And it's there's always been wealth inequality. Look at nature. Once again, I always return to look at the natural world, because we are part of the natural world, no matter how hard we try to make it that, but look, we have cars, we have medicine, we have electricity. We're not animals. We're not part of nature. Nature's over there, out there. We are still an animal. We are still part of nature. And in nature, there is hardship. And in nature, that is what helps animals to persevere. And not every animal has a fair share. That has never been the case. Unless you're talking about ants or something, you want to be an ant, because those are animals that I guess everybody has their fair share, but they're all drones. They're all identical, interchangeable organisms who are a hive mind. We are blessed with individuality. We are a species that is vastly complex, where each person is a combination of all these different desires and talents and proclivities. And the fact that like we have inequalities in resources is so often evidence that we choose to do different things. Like, I know people who intentionally live low wage, scraggly lives. Like, they want to live van life. They want to work on a working farm. Like, they're not trying to be super CEOs. They don't care about that. That's not oppression. That's freedom. That's the freedom to choose the life you want. Not everybody cares about being a millionaire. And so, but then, the thing is, some people do, and then they find that path. And so what's interesting about this guy's story is he tells you, like, he had these hardships, but he developed things that help him to pursue what he wanted, which to be highly successful. And so he talks about like giving people those opportunities that he had. And it's not, oh, I went back to my old neighborhood and I gave everybody money, because that's not what he needed. And so he's helping people in the very way that he would have needed the help. And so he talks about in this story, here we go. They are working to break the cycle of poverty and disadvantage and give people positive role models. My experience has made me painfully aware that there is so much talent in these communities. You just need to open the door a crack to give people a chance, he said. Forbes said that as he was growing up, the only Black people he could see who were successful seemed to be in entertainment, sport, or quote unquote doing unsavory things in criminal gangs. He said he wanted to make success in business more quote unquote relatable, in part through mentoring and networking projects. And so this is essentially what he does, is like trying to help provide role models and like opportunities for people that want it. And it's like, there you go. This is someone who took their hardship, and because of that, they're able to turn around and help others in the specific way that they know how. You're telling me that he should have never had the opportunity to develop those skills to help others? I don't know. I don't think that that's how humanity works. I don't think it's realistic to think that, oh, we should just never have poverty. We should just never have homeless. We should just never have any of these problems. And that way people don't need to become people that help others. Like, maybe that's actually the meaning of life. Is you are saddled with problems, and then you set out to help others through learning how to overcome those problems. By the way, that is so often what actual business advice is. Like any kinds of business trainings that I've gone to, they talk about like, so what do you know how to do? What problems have you solved in your life? Okay, there's your business. Go help other people the way that you learned how to solve that problem so that they can solve the problem for themselves. So, I mean, there's really something very fundamental here about what it is to be a human being and the role that problems play in our life. And I found that this topic has come up for me twice now in both of these good news streams, because I remember when I was like more of this leftist minded person, I could not accept good news, because to me, good news was evidence that we were starting from a bad place, and we should not be starting from a bad place, because we should have solved all our problems. So this man should not be a success story because he should have never been homeless. But that's the thing. It's like, is that really a realistic view of the world? Is that truly something that we can strive for? Or instead, is it more realistic and healthy to strive for a perspective that says, no, there will always be problems, but what we can do is use our agency and our skills to help others solve those problems as we solve them for ourselves? Does that seem more realistic? Does that seem more productive? It does to me, and it has been for me. Like literally, it has worked for me. I've tried both perspectives out now, and this one works best so far. You can let me know if you found a third perspective that synergizes the resentment and the positivity. But so far, I'm sticking with the positivity. So that is our good news roundup for this week. And we've got healthcare advances, we've got people doing great things and helping others, and we got the environment flourishing, animals coming back from the brink of extinction, and potentially getting rid of some of the worst pollution problems that we have. I mean, it's just straight up good news. Like there's no way to say, that doesn't matter that much. It's good news. So I'm going to jump into chat here as we end our live stream and see what you all think about some of this good news. See if you have any thoughts. And I'd also love to ask you to do something, which is apply this to your life. Okay, so I am going to do this for every single live stream, and I am going to tell you that you need to actually look for the things that are working in your life. You need to look for the good things. It's kind of a weird perspective hack, because what I have found is that we get so numb to the good. And one of the things that I like to do is go to the grocery store and think about what it was like to be a person in like the 1700s America, and then look at all the groceries. And suddenly what feels like a mundane chore that I'm doing that I'm like, I wish I didn't even have to go to the grocery store, becomes this amazing paradise where I'm just like, wow, how can there be so many kinds of bread? And it's this far more enjoyable activity that is infused with gratitude than what it would be if I just like let myself get numb to all the good things that are around us all the time. And so that is something that we have to actively do. You have to actively try to develop a positive view on things. It does not come naturally. And this is what I've found is like so interesting also about like negative perspectives, where it's presented as some kind of high-minded, aware, perspective on things to be negative. And it's easy to be negative. That is the easy thing to do. That is the default. Your default is going to be to focus on all the things that are bad and to let that define your perspective. So when you see a person that is primarily focusing on the negative and has a largely negative view of life and the world, you are seeing someone look at the world on easy mode. I'm sorry, that's what it is. It takes effort. It takes intention to develop a perspective that highlights the good. Because one, we have the negativity bias, and two, we're humans. We are flawed. Life is hard. It is very easy to focus on the hard things. I have to remind myself that you are not getting a participation ribbon for being the most miserable person. No one is going to say, hey, good job. You really know all the bad things that are going on in this world. That's easy. We have an inbuilt radar to pick up on everything bad, every potential problems that even have not happened. You're going to have those in mind. What we don't have naturally is noticing all the things that are going well, both in our life and in our society. And so that is something that you want to be cultivating actively. And that's why we do the weekly white pill, where we round up all the good news. So don't forget to do that for your life, because it really makes a difference. And my theory is that the more we practice focusing on the good news, the more we can make more of it, because then we know what's working. I think that's the real scary thing, is that if you don't understand what is working, what is going well, then why would you preserve it? Why would you support it? You don't think it's working. And so we really do need, if we're interested and care about having a better future and advancing as a society, as an individual, we need to know what works. So like I've said, the good news roundup isn't just a kumbaya moment. It is an intentional effort to have a balanced, accurate perspective on the world so that we know both what doesn't work and what works, because that's how you have an actionable, rational perspective on life. Thank you, Andrea. I am so glad that you're enjoying the good news roundup. I know it's a nice change from what I listen to also. It's crazy because I don't know, I think it's such, I don't know why we focus on bad news so much. It becomes so normal. I know it's the negativity bias, but once you start actively trying to look at the good news and to make it part of your media diet, right? Your information diet, if you think about it like that. Once you get intentional about it, you realize, oh my God, we don't do this. Not on my social media feed, not in the normal news, not in the alternative news. we are always talking about what's going wrong. And it's such an amazing thing because, like, particularly if you're someone like me that lives in a wealthy Western country and you are always focusing on the things that are going wrong, like, listen, I know that it's real, but also just take a moment to switch places mentally with like a 1700s American pioneer or like a 1300s villager in old England, and where it was just like you're eating gruel all the time and you're constantly working just to have food. You're not doing anything else. In some ways, hey, those people had like some things going for them, but we live in a crazy Candyland Disney World paradise compared to them. I mean, they had constant illnesses and they died of things that we wouldn't even get sick from today because we would have it gone so quickly. So like, we have to, yes, address what doesn't work. Yes, care about the problems, but we got to do it while being rational. We've got to do it while being grounded in the fact that we've got a lot of shit going right also. And I think that is really the difference between like this kind of more default negative, indulgent. I do think there's like a level of indulgence to negativity because it takes discipline to say, no, I am going to intentionally spend some of my time focused on what I love, what inspires me, what is going well. Because it's so easy to be like, oh, I hate that. Let me talk about it. Ooh, I don't like that. I'm going to tell people. Like, that is the first instinct. And it takes that mastery, that sense of like, no, you know what? I want to take some of my time and energy to boost and highlight what is good, what is working. I think there's almost like a kind of, you can come at it with like this magic mentality, you know, like this alchemical mentality of what you spend your time and energy to is what you fuel. That's so real. And so the same thing works with just good news, right? If we don't talk about good news, if we don't spend time like doing discourse around it, because that's the thing, it's like, I see these good news roundup and they're like, this happened, that happened. I'm like, that's nice. Now I've got to do all the work to like, okay, how do I fit this into my narrative of the world? Like, how do I make this part of my worldview? What does this mean? What are the implications of this on my current view of things like the environment or healthcare or whatever? Then I'm just left doing all that work. But this is what these kind of like live streams and like social media discourse do. They help you integrate things. But a lot of the times they're integrating things that are just negative. So I want to spend some time integrating things that are positive. And that's what we're doing. So I want to thank you all for joining this Good News live stream. And please subscribe to wetheblacksheep.com, my publication, where you will get notified of my upcoming live streams. I'm doing this 3 times a week. We got one, the Weekly Whitepill, and then I do 2 other streams covering different things, usually either studies or concepts that are related to individualism, anti-groupthink, and overall the Black Sheep archetype, and how to apply that to your life. So you can also go back to the Black Sheep and find those older streams. We recently did one on the Black Sheep symbol and like what that means for your life, what if you are a Black Sheep, how to be a Black Sheep, how to utilize that as a strength instead of just being the odd one out and feeling like uncomfortable all the time for it. I've also talked about previous research that leads into ideas of individualism and like nonconformity and like living in your values as opposed to just having like a political identity and like outsourcing the actual choices you must make to live a life aligned with your values to that political identity. So lots of good stuff on the Black Sheep. Check it out, subscribe so we can stay in touch, and thank you for joining. I had a lot of fun chatting about the good news, and I hope you did too. So hope you will focus on the good news in your life, and I will see you on our next live stream.